Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. All the speakers and participants that have signed up for this forum, forumlawa.org. Let us have an enormous hug at a distance, and it's an honor to give Cardinal Claudio Ubes the floor so that he can give us all a brief welcome. Mr. Claudio, the floor is yours. Ladies and gentlemen, participants, welcome you all. We are initiating a series of online fora today on the right to water, the right to hope. On behalf of the hosts of this fora, namely the Institute for Cultural Dialogue and Encounter Culture, headed by Luis Lieberman and Gabriela Sacco, and the REPAM, the Pan-Amazon Ecclesial Network that I preside, I would like to greet you all and welcome you all. And I ask God to enlighten us and inspire us. And now I give the floor to Luis Lieberman for the introduction. Thank you very much, Claudio. I should say, out of script, that this technological procedure is learning experience for us. I am sure that this is going to change the way we're going to meet. This forum that we are starting today and that will end in September suggests the consolidation of challenges on the right to water, the sustainable development, and the participation of communities for the preservation of our common house. We are happy to meet so many female and male friends with whom we have been dealing with since February 2017, the city of Rome. We left that rationale of events to work together and to build a process. And it's an honor for us to keep on growing along with REPAM and to work on the creation, development, and transfer of knowledge. This forum is a forum to work on our ideas and to share them. We want to thank and hug Cardinal Humens who humbly guide us in this task. He's also the general rapporteur of the Amazon. You know, in the first meeting held by the Catholic Church, we talked about a specific meeting in the Vatican Second Concilium. We were there. It was an outstanding transformation experience. These meetings, the ones that will be held between today and September, will allow us to retrieve experience, analyze cases, recognize scenarios, and make sense of methodologies. We want to work to improve all cooperation instances, to cooperate to better proposals, to fix those problems that humankind has. The right to hope is one of those issues. Today, we are affected by the COVID-19 pandemic that aggravates the problem. To understand figures, 4 out of 10 people in the world are affected by the scarcity of water. And this has not changed in the last 10 years. And we have had global experience like the Agenda 2030 of Sustainable Development Goals, which we will have to revise after this traumatic experience we are going through so that we can understand the future of our planet. And this is very impactful. Let us think about the following. The only preventive factor of this pandemic is hand washing. Water provides us with solution, at least prevention. It's amazing that after 120 or 130 years of Ignace Semmelweis studies on the puerperal fever, hand washing keeps on being a vital element for educational building, and it's a necessary awareness act for personal and social hygiene. And it's a paradox that we should think about political policy so that people wash our hands. It's pathetic. It shows us how much we still have to do and how little we have done. So we understand that this is a genuine knowledge building, and in that regard, we want to acknowledge the institutional supports with which we have organized this forum. We always want to have dialogue. We want to mention the University of Rosario. I know that Pedro Romero is looking at us, the Northwest University of the Province of Buenos Aires. Her vice dean asked us to log in. She has been our friend since the very beginning, and she has supported this task with generosity. I want to thank UNOPS, the United Nations Office for Service Projects. Here we have Alejandro Rossi, but we know that Monica Rivera is also online, along with Giuseppe Mancinelli and all the team, and the healthcare workers for development and training that was the creation of the Water University. Thank you all. And once again, thank you. Because all together we can do it. As it was once said in the form of an accident in the high school, if we are together, we are stronger, and that's it, yeah. So we kindly ask you to think about the institutional learning that we have to think about so as to create the necessary change. And once again, I think about what, perhaps this is my opinion, is the strongest century image, and that is Pope Francis walking to a Sagrado Atrium on March 2020. He said, we are in the same boat. We are all weak, we are lost, but we all need each other. I'll say it once again, we are all necessary, and there is only one boat. And in this regard, the challenge of all this learning is to question the order of injustice and the question of and the order of inequality, so as to better understand and to boost the changes we need in the building of our future. I would like to say, before giving Gabriela the floor, that this forum is being broadcast on all the social media of the Institute for Dialogue and Culture, and also through Ambiente Radio. That is the only radio that addresses these issues and belongs to the National Federation of Healthcare Workers. If someone needs to set aside from this experience, you can listen to it in the ambienteradio.com.ar, because our team is working on it with a lot of generosity and willingness. Thank you very much. We are not going to listen to the usual clap of hands, but see how to implement it. But it is very important to enjoy mistakes and to celebrate this meeting that will make us be better people. Gabriela, the floor is yours. Luis, thank you very much. Once again, welcome you all. My name is Gabriela Sacco. I am the Executive Director of the Institute for Global Dialogue and Culture of Encounter. The series of online fora addresses different dimensions referred to the solution of issues, having water a guiding principle. Our aim is to achieve specific cross-sectional approaches, identification of contextual elements and key players, the assessment and proposal of solutions for prospective future scenarios, and for those issues affecting us all today. I hope that the working dynamics will involve a dialogue of suggested actions and experiences. In these forums, the first of a set of 6 that will be developing until the month of September, it's a pleasure for us, and it also involves a responsibility of having speakers such as, and I will be naming them in the order in which they will be making their presentations. Cecilia Tortajada from the Institute of Water Policy, Lee Wan Yu School of Public Policy of the National University of Singapore. Asit Biswat, Stockholm Water Prize. He's also a professor of Singapore and Glasgow University, and he's executive director of the Third World Center for Water Management in Mexico. Alejandro Rossi, director of UNOPS Multi-Country Office for Caribbean and Panama. Peter Glake is the Pacific Institute Emeritus President, member of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences. Carl Sagan Prize for Science Popularization, Rafael Ramirez, Professor of Oxford University and Oxford Future Scenarios Program Director in the Sci Business School in Oxford, Monsignor Lucio Ruiz, Secretary of the Dicastery for the Vatican Communication, has a PhD in biomedical sciences, and he's also a collaborator at the Pontifical Council for Social Communications. Patricia Hualinga, leader of the Ecuadorian Amazon Sarayaku people, and one of the voices in the Amazon Synod in October 2019. Father Daniel Grudy, Vice President of Notre Dame University in the US. He's a professor of theology and director of Kellogg Global Leadership Program, and Ricardo Lorenzetti, Minister of the Argentine Supreme Court of Justice and Goodwill Ambassador for Environmental Justice in the OAS. Before starting, I would like to address some organizational issues. This forum is provided with simultaneous translation. Each one of you can choose a language in which you want to listen, Spanish or English. When speaking, please select the channel of the language in which you will be speaking. All the options are shown on the bottom section of the screen. At the end of this speaker panel, we'll create opportunities for dialogue. Luis Lieberman and I will be serving as moderators. All speakers, independently of the panel, are invited to kindly participate, to actively participate in this dialogue. So when you want to speak, please raise your hands. There is a raise hand option available next to your name. The members of the forum participants are kindly requested to write their questions in the Q&A section so that we can later on ask them to the speakers. If you are not speakers, please bear in mind that we'll only take the Q&A section questions, not the ones written in the chat box, okay? The members of the forum will have their cameras on while the questions are being answered. As Luis Lieberman said before, we'll be able to take some questions, but we'll remind you of these participation guidelines along this seminar. Luis, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. We want to highlight that participation is through the Q&A. And now we will talk about the building of notions and hope. That's why our first speaker will be Cardinal Claudio Umes from Sao Paulo. Claudio, the floor is yours. Hope. It's not enough to talk about hope, because we run the risk of turning the word into an empty and deceitful term. Hope needs to be built with the beneficiaries. I mean, it's a process of dialogue and encounter. The devastating situation following the COVID-19 economic, socio-environmental, healthcare crisis gave rise to a global perplex scenario and anguishing insecurity in ordinary people. Whether it be because of poverty and misery that were spread, whether because of the mass evident unemployment, or because of all the questions raised about the future of young and children's school education, and because of all other situations have emerged from this pandemic. It all indicates that post-pandemic era will bring about difficult times. Lack of formal employment, companies that have gone bankrupt or that are in the process of going bankrupt, rising starvation, lack of access to everyone to safe and drinking water, which is a vital, fundamental, and universal human right. The preservation of the current water cycle for the planet, comprehensive sustainability, and others. Also, society as a whole was deeply affected and fragmented. And that usually gave rise to serious illegal, corrupt, violent activities and disputes. On the other hand, COVID-19 pandemic also gave rise in people and communities to new solidarity practices and styles, family and harmonious coexistence, new ways of creativity in several fields, and the like. How can we overcome the hurdles and boost the advantages? This is the issue. If we want to build hope, undoubtedly, this is also a cultural issue. It has to do with how to add new vital future elements to our cultural universe. In a multicultural, transcultural, and intercultural world. Therefore, it will be vital to open our mind, our heart, and our hands to open our heart, our hands, and our hands. That is to say, to add new elements to knowledge, to open our heart for an inclusive welcome of the new elements. And as a result, to innovate into a new specific practice at the light of dialogue and encounter. The process of preparation, organization of the Synod of Bishops for the Catholic Church Amazon in the last 2 years, and now of the application of the Synod guidelines in the Pan-Amazon territory can perhaps enlighten and inspire the building of hope today. The people in charge of the synod preparation in the territory were the following: dioceses, apostolic vicariates, prelacies, missions, each one in its own territory, and REPAM, the Pan-Amazon Ecclesial Network in all the territory. It was a process that involved going out to the geographical and existential peripheral areas. That is to say, reaching out to people and not letting them to come to us, to listen to them with a coming and going, and always to listen and to see life, the problems, and the dreams that people had, the yells of the poor and those of the environment. Immediately, along with them, We have to come up with solutions. Roughly 87,000 people were heard in territorial assemblies, local meetings, and meetings. 87,000 people were heard in those settings. It was a unique experience. Never before had there been a similar process. People and communities farther away in the jungle, in the riverbanks, and peripheral areas of cities started to trust once again and to nourish hope. The outcome of all this preparation was shown in the synod, and there it was analyzed and discussed. The synod also involved the presence of bishops and representatives of the people from the territory, even native people, native populations. These were 3 weeks of assembly meetings. Miss Lieberman and I also participated in these meetings. Now this is a time to apply the synod in the territory. The process goes on with the same rationale. We come back from the repam and the dioceses, the vicariates, prelacies, and missions. We go back to people and their communities so as to once again meet them and present them with the outcomes of the synod. And listen to them again. Listen to them again with our heart, mind, and open hands. And with them, we're going to build the new pathways suggested. This process will take years, but it will be deeply rewarding, and it should be respectful of people, primarily of the most humble, that are always discarded from the prevailing society and the people in charge. And I want to end my talk by wishing that this online fora that we are starting today can contribute to the building of hope, which is so necessary for devastating times of the COVID-19 pandemic and the global social environmental crisis. Thank you very much. Thank you, Claudio Umes. It has been a pleasure to listen to you, Cardinal Umes. And now we will start with the first panel. The first panel will hear from Cecilia Tortajada, then as this was, and the panel will be closed by Alejandro Rossi. We have participants from Peru, Colombia, and Italy. So welcome you all, and now we'll hear from Cecilia. Thank you, Gabriela. Thank you very much, Cecilia. Now we will hear from Asit Biswas. Asit, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good evening from Singapore. In about 2.5 hours after 2 months, we will be free to get out from our lockdown because of the COVID-19. So I'm looking forward to the next day so we can go out and see the environment and feel like a normal human being. I like very much the idea of this seminar or this virtual seminar, right to water and the right to hope. And let me just quickly give you a very brief background. Whereas we have come a long way, especially during the last 40 years, on providing water to millions of people or hundreds of millions of people to all over the world, water has not been in the international political agenda for long. In fact, for the very first time, it entered the international political agenda was in 1977 in the UN Water Conference in Argentina, which gave birth to the International Water Supply and Sanitation Decade. And the idea was by the decade of 1981 to 1990, every person in this world will have access to clean water and sanitation. Irrespective of what has happened, the fact remains the decade was outstandingly successful, even though, of course, it did not reach its goal. But hundreds of millions of people received water which otherwise they might have got, perhaps quite some time later. In 2010, when UN came out with the General Assembly came out, the right to water, few things have happened. And especially, I'll share with you some of my views. I think the water profession and the development profession are not looking objectively at the successful stories of how the world's people, everyone in the world, will have access to clean water. And this goes not only for the developing world, for developed world. And the last 10 years, one thing that has become even more important, especially in the developed world and also in the developing world, access to water does not mean that people have trust in the quality of water they receive. In fact, our studies now indicate that especially in the Western world, millions of people are now not drinking from the tap because they do not trust the tap water because of some mismanagement, especially coming from places like Flint, Michigan, Walkerton in Canada, where many people died. As a result of which, from Germany to Singapore to United States, more and more people in the Western world are now either drinking bottled water or using point of use treatment systems. And this is, of course, always been there in the developing world. One of the main problems with the UN system and the international system has been that last 40 years, the focus has been on water quantity. When we talk about when the UN Secretary General in 2013 proudly announced in the World Water Forum that the Millennium Development Goal in the area of water has been reached 2 years in advance. The question then comes, what does it mean? Even now, from our studies, we can say that at least 3.5 billion people in the world, and mark this number, at least 3.5 billion people in the world now receive a water supply which they do not trust. And this number, regrettably, is not decreasing, but actually going up. So we have to start thinking about, when we talk about the right to water, also how we can get people to trust the quality of water we are providing. And this has become an important issue after COVID-19 because of hand washing requirements and personal hygiene requirements. So I want to share with you quickly 4 points, which I think will contribute greatly to the provision of clean water to people over the world. And this will not be done if we go in our existing business model. Let me quickly say what are the 3 do's that are needed. If you want to see a successful case study of a water utility, which in 1993 was completely dysfunctional, but now in a developing world, completely dysfunctional and bankrupt, which in 10 years' time became one of the most successful, not only in the developing world, but it's some of the performance indicators now, and has been for the last 10 years, better than London, better than Paris, better than Los Angeles, or better than Chicago. And this is in a developing country which had no concept of how to go about it. And if I say the name of the city which did this miracle, most of you will probably not realize that what they have done. This is Phnom Penh in Cambodia. And what it has done is absolutely remarkable. In 1993, Phnom Penh had the good sense, or the government of Cambodia had the good sense to appoint a man called Exxon Chan to see what can be done to save the moribund water utility, which was completely bankrupt. Exxon Chan knew nothing about water. He was a good man, committed man, dedicated man. He came to the PPWSA, the Phnom Penh Water Supply Association, and started looking what needs to be done. And believe me, providing clean water is not rocket science. And basically what he did is few things. First, reduce unaccounted for water. When he took over, the unaccounted for water in Phnom Penh was 73%. Very few people had access to water, and water was available only for a few hours of very dubious quality. So he reduced the first significantly unaccounted for water, and it came down to about 5 to 6%, which is significantly better than what's happening in London or Chicago or Paris. Then he ensured that everyone pays for water, rich or the poor, but the poor gets a targeted subsidy, and made sure that all corruptions are enrooted. And one of the rules he made is no politicians can stop with any of his staff. If any staff took a telephone call from a politician, he had grounds for being fired. And he was told, and all the staff were told, if any politician comes to you, please tell them that if you talk with them, you'll be fired. Which allowed Exxon Chan to take over the political heat, but allowed the staff to think about the long-term situation. Right now, if you go to the worst slum of Phnom Penh, most of the people will not know the name of the Prime Minister of Cambodia. But probably this is the only utility where a slum dweller knows the name of the boss of the water utility, because he's the only person who has done anything important. He has provided them clean water at a cost they can afford. The poor pays for it, and the rich pays for it, because they get absolutely no subsidy from the government or the municipality. So everything is what the consumers are paying, and this, he has made a remarkable choice. And that my thesis is, if Phnom Penh can do it with very little management expertise, very little technical expertise, in 1993, there was virtually very little financing available. If they could do it, why cannot more higher income developing countries, from India to Bangladesh, from virtually all in Latin America and Africa, why they can't do it? It's not a rocket science, it can be done. Second item I want to share with you very quickly is something, these are again 3 case studies I'm doing, is what originally came from developing countries. One is Phnom Penh. Second is, you'll be surprised, who comes from Jodhpur, a medium-sized city in India. Jodhpur is the only city I know anywhere in the world which on each month's water bill, when people get it, they tell you how much water you consume, how much water you're paying, but what is more important, how much the government or the municipality is subsidizing each household that month, the amount of the subsidy. I haven't seen anywhere else saying that what support people are, all the consumers are getting from getting from the government or the municipality. The third one I'll give you Singapore. Singapore is now, of course, a developed country. But in 1965, when Singapore was a third world country, had as good as a water supply as Delhi or Dhaka, one of the things Lee Kuan Yew, a remarkable man whom we came to know very well, did is made a very simple rule that people must pay for water, they must have clean water, the poor must get a subsidy, targeted subsidy, they get in terms of voucher, but unlike the rest of the world, it is not the water utility of Singapore that pays the subsidy. And the thesis is the job of the water utility is to provide a very efficient water supply. The job of the water utility is not to provide per se the poor. The poor must get water, but that loss, what Singapore has started doing from 1965 onward, that each poor family or who cannot afford water, they get a voucher every month for their water and electricity bill. And this voucher comes not from the pocket of the water utility, it comes from the Social Security Department. And the water utility uses the voucher, which is funded fully by this department. So water utility gets the money because the water investment in water and wastewater is increasing enormously. And it will increase even more with the COVID-19 event. And finally, let me just quote with one final sentence from my favorite poet, British American poet, W.H. Auden. He said, more than half a century ago, he said, many people have lived without, thousands of people have lived without love, but not a single one with water, to which I'll add, not only water, we have to start thinking about how we can provide them with safe water, which they trust to be safe, which has completely missed the lexicon of the water professionals and the politicians. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Biswas. Thank you, Cecilia. Now we'll hear from Alejandro Rossi. I want to remind you of some items. Please remember to click on the language you want to hear. That option is on the right, so you can listen to the translator. And questions are made at the Q&A section. Alejandro, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Cecilia. Thank you for having me here. I want to thank all the people that are listening to us. As from what we want to contribute, I would like to refer to 3 dimensions of the human right to water. One of them is the legal aspect. The second is the one that has to do with governance, good governance. And the third, perhaps in terms of hope, and that has to do with innovation, the huge leap of innovation to make things change. The Romans used to say, give me fact, and I will give you a right. The legal system is based upon the idea of providing practical solutions. At the beginning, we started fixing specific solutions with a pragmatic criterion, and then the standards were structured. Standards were tried to be ahead of the future and somehow model what we could expect from the right. The right is inspired in the real world, but it is inspired to order the reality based on a principle of justice. This justice is preached for individual relationships, one-to-one relationships, and also the relationship of the state with people, guided by the principle of distributionary justice to allocate each one depending of their opportunities and possibilities. That is to say, with a proportional criteria. As a result of a long-standing process, the first laws and codes, there in our countries, there are standards and regulations that recognize rights of any kind. Today, there are more rights than ever before in the history. But the reality many times is different. We can say that the newer the recognition of rights are, the harder it can be to acknowledge that this recognition is effective. Even when there are many exceptions such as slavery, so sexual exploitation, that are on the rise, even if they were forbidden centuries ago. Within this evolution pathway, the human right to water was recognized by the UN General Assembly in 2010, as Professor Bitz was mentioned before, as we started this pathway 33 years ago in the city of Mar del Plata in Argentina. From then on, many political institutions started to recognize this right. And even so, we can say that we are very far away from acknowledging that this recognition becomes true. Out of 7,700 million people, 3 out of 10 lack access to safe water. 6 out of 10 lack access to sanitation. A situation with a growing poverty, as was also mentioned by Professor Biswas and Cardinal Tortajada. Growing poverty is only going to make this divide bigger, that has a lot of impacts on the environment, because 80% of effluents are dumped into our rivers and seas, and they are untreated. This is a reality. In this context, the UN has warned us about the necessity of a shift of paradigm by ensuring not only public administrations, but only all public-private sectors have to take a primary role to speed up this process so as to make sure the right to water and sanitation becomes a reality, such as it is provided for in the Agenda 2030 and the 6th Sustainable Development Goal. It's one of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Naturally speaking, this calls for enormous investments, the adequacy of regulatory and legal frameworks, and a change of mindset in terms of implications to access this human right. We are talking about life, and we are also talking about death. We're talking about death in its multiple aspects: food, growth, opportunities, diseases, the shortening of the life expectancy, hygiene, stigmas, wars, among all other horrendous acts that make the people's lives and developments be aborted. Regarding governance, when a community trusts its system of rights and obligations, rules are clear and people know what the rules are. And based on them, their lives can be ordered. Conversely, when there is uncertainty, recognition of rights resembles the allegory of Plato's caverns, like a shadow of a reality we can never have access to. When a right is acknowledged and it's inaccessible, when people living under poverty know that they will never have access to paramount rights such as water, housing, and education, so something is broken. Hope is broken, and the governance and the possibility to live in peace and with security. Precisely because the minimum justice perception doesn't exist any longer. amidst this framework, when we talk about changing a paradigm of generalized isolation and the possibility to close this gap, we have to revalue hope as a view of the future, as a focus, and we have to know that we can still make this huge leap in the way we think about needs and in a way that is unprecedented. In this regard, the right to water is uncomparable because we are going to include our country's legislation, which is positive. I will have to recognize that legislative system does not change that. Cardinal Hume said we have to open our mind, hearts, and hands. It's not enough to address a formal dimension. We have to reach out to reality, and there is no time to be wasted. The acknowledgement of rights and the regulatory dimensions are not enough because they don't reach in time. This is time to rethink planning and action strategies. Perhaps the planning neologism is what we need, including ways to act that highlight the new characteristic of public policies. Those people that are most vulnerable and invisible due to the complex problems they are faced with, and they are invisible because our impossibility to accept their existence, because we are blind and we cannot see that if we set aside others, this is going to end up being the rising tragedy of everyone. Last but not least, we believe that we need to make a huge innovation leap. Cardinal Hume referred to that issue several times. The situation in our humankind and planet is more serious than ever before. We have the climate change challenges, natural disasters, and growing injustices. Now we have the new era of global diseases. Humankind cannot afford to think as it used to do so 2 centuries ago. We have to wake up to an innovation cycle characterized by the disruption of ongoing processes and the replication of statistical solutions for large problems such as access to water and sanitation. There are many successful initiatives underway, as Professor Biss was mentioned before, but there are many more. But we have to achieve a statistically significant scale. We need technological, regulatory, innovation, and social tools to converge so that they drastically change the way we address the past and future problems with a powerful perception. Why do we want to do that? Because we want to make sure the planning and implementation of public policies are present for vulnerable people, so as to reach out to the slums and poor neighborhoods. Many times they don't have regular access, but we still need to make sure safe access to water and the protection of property, because we have to ensure new ways of investment so that public services can be sustainable a long time. So we can ensure services to people that cannot afford to do so. To harmonize the equilibrium, the balance between ecosystems. Cecilia referred to the issue before. We should be able to invest in terms of economic depression without sacrificing the environment. So we make sure that we can monitor and protect water and sanitation, and to understand the relationship between these items and the health of our communities. We have to understand what the sacrifice in terms of human lives is if we don't get to ensure this access. Last but not least, we have to make sure that men and women have equal access to right to water and sanitation. Without this, the difference postpone the inequalities of the 21st century. We're talking about the right to water. We have to create disruption areas to promote social, technological, and innovation so that people, vulnerable people, can have access to water and sanitation as soon as possible. When we talk about hope, we talk about future and how we talk about trust, there is a fair future ahead. If we lose hope, everything else is lost. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alejandro. Let us once again think about this moment as a learning experience. In face-to-face meetings, we said, okay, let us have a coffee break and we meet in a minute. This is not going to happen now. You can have coffee, of course, at home, right? We are going to start the first round of questions. I'm going to read two that we have received. Amelia Bocarea, Jose. Jose raised three questions. I'm going to turn them into three, and I will give the floor to the speakers so we can focus on the answers. This is Jose's question. How can we raise awareness in people and governance so that water is adequately used? And these two questions have to do with the first, how can we avoid the degradation and pollution? And how can we achieve quality supply for everyone? Then Emilia, whom I agree we can only show her image. Emilia Bocanera has been with us in many encounters, and she has been part of the committees. What does the right to hope mean in the context of the right to water? What is the right to hope for people who live in poverty without access to water? So there we have Jose's question and that of Emilia. And Teresita from Betancourt says, why should we think that innovation is more than technology? Is it the way to the economic development? These are complex questions. They are open to all speakers. If some of our speakers want to answer those questions, they can do so, or I can randomly choose who is going to answer. But I think it's not good. I think it's interesting to address these three questions. So I'm going to start and let the English speaker think about better understand the questions. There are two immediate reactions. One of them is how to keep on raising awareness, which is a paramount issue. I want to think about Cardinal Ume's idea, the idea of moving into action, and not to just keep on philosophically reflecting upon the access to water. So how can we raise awareness? First of all, we need data. I think Professor Biswas is a worldwide renowned specialist because he has provided data and evidence so we can come to conclusions in public policies. So first we have to let the data be known, and then we have to make this data available to the service of action. We can no longer keep on waiting to carry out prospective analysis regarding what is going to happen. We have to change this reality based on the available evidence. And the last remark has to do with the ill fame of innovation. When we talk about innovation, it seems that we are talking about the purchase of machinery and bet on technologies. But that's not only the case. Innovation is disruption, changing the way we think things categorically. And not just to make a variation, to do something that changes the way we do something so that it can be improved. So this presents us with a complex thought. There is a lot of room for mistakes. And it's part of the science to make mistakes, but only if we make mistakes and if we launch these new initiatives, will we be able to achieve something new. So I think the youth and the experience that we adult people have, those who have worked in the sector for many years, have the chance to work together so we can achieve new solutions without being afraid of making mistakes. And we should go back to the roots. It's very difficult in a world that has multiplied its population, that will increasingly have fewer natural resources and will be more affected by natural resources, to think in a traditional way. We need a new way to address this new reality. The new reality is not the one that the COVID-19 presents us with. We have a new reality, the one that we are living with. We have a rising temperatures, water is polluted. This is a new order of things, and we'll have to get used to living in that world with innovation, creativity, and also with mistakes. But if the willpower doesn't fail, we will be able to make progress. Thank you very much, Alejandro. That question is related to the first question asked by Jose. How can we raise awareness in people and governments for the conservation of biomes that are conservation sources for the Amazon, the Guarani area? Awareness raising is a very strong issue. Perhaps Mr. Renzetti can give us a helping hand. He's a global expert. The microphone, please. Ricardo, you have to turn on your microphone. Oh, perhaps we should turn on his microphone. I was listening to the different opinions, and I think, as Cardinal Gomez said, it's better to listen. And at the end, I will be giving my opinion. Thank you very much. Well, okay, that's right. Okay, thank you, Ricardo. Cecilia? I want to say something regarding what you were saying about awareness. As Alejandro has just said, there is awareness. We know about the changes that are taking place in ordinary people, in academicians, and in politicians. We know that there are changes and that we are exposed to risk, but each change requires effort, planning, and acceptance. It's so complex that we sometimes set it aside, and for some reason, we have thought that we have to change primary school children what they have to do. It is clear that we have to teach them, because the level of awareness raising is important. I think that is not only what or how we do things to raise awareness, because awareness exists, but what we should have, it is the understanding of risks posed by not acting once you are aware. And this is a very complex issue at worldwide level in the developing countries, because we don't do things the right way. It has to do with management, and developing countries have to do so. Not everything must be perfect, but there should be institutions and governance that are not available in the world. 2/3 of the population have to do things better and faster. Thank you very much. Would like to tell you that we are receiving lots of questions. We are not going to be able to answer them all, but let's now turn on the camera of Sherry Batter. It's an honor to have one of the outstanding philosophers in the world with us, and it's an exception we're going to make. It's just an exception we're going to make. Shani has been founder of the chair of Dialogue and Encounter Chair. This issue is going to address in the public policies meeting. So Alberto, please save this question, because it centralizes discussion when we talk about public policies. Do we have Shani Batimo online? Are you there? Are you listening to us, Shani? If not, we will hear from him later. As after each segment, there will be time for dialogue. This is the first one, and it's the toughest. Now we will be opening the second panel of speakers in the way the order in which we're speaking, we have Peter Glade, then Rafael Ramirez, and then Monsignor Lucio Ruiz. Peter, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Very good. So first of all, I will be speaking in English. My apologies, but especially my thanks to the translators. And thank you also to the organizers of the conference. It's obviously a difficult time for everybody. I hope that everybody is trying to stay healthy. I, for one, am not sorry that I don't have to get on an airplane to see all of you, but I'm sorry that I can't see you all in person. It's a different world today, of course. I'm going to try and share my screen. Let me see if that will work. I don't know. Can you see my slides?
Perfect.
Perfect. Okay, very good. So as has already been said, part of this conference is building on the previous work that was done a long time ago, but also in 2017 with the support of the Vatican Pontifical Academy of Sciences, for which I thank you. And can you see this picture from 2017? Is that on your screen? It's not on mine. I hope so. What I would like to do is just make a few, thank you, Luis, just make a few quick points, and then we can have discussion. Charles Darwin said, of course, that if the misery of our poor be caused not by the laws of nature, but by our institutions, great is our sin. And of course, the misery of our poor is caused by our institutions, our institutional failures, the failure of governments or politicians or economies to address the critical issues of poverty, including, of course, the critical issue of water. As for the human right to water, as our previous speakers have made clear, there is a very clear, explicit legal human right to safe and affordable water and sanitation. And of course, we cannot ever forget the sanitation component of this. And that right has been recognized by the United Nations. It's been recognized by governments around the world, by human rights organizations, and by many others. As we've seen, for example, with the encyclical statement that came out of the Vatican, the statement in 2017 out of the conference that was previously organized by these organizations here and supported by the Pontifical Academy of Sciences and by many others. The failure to provide that right, however, universally has still affects billions of people, almost 800 million people without access to safe water, more than 2 billion people without access to sanitation, as all of us know, and as we understand as the remaining challenge facing the water community. So a few observations. First of all, the failure to provide safe water and sanitation is not just a challenge for the developing world. It's a challenge even for those of us fortunate enough to live in the richer parts of the world. A second observation is that a strong economy by itself does not guarantee the human right to water will be satisfied. Even those economies around the world that are strong have in many parts of the world failed to meet the basic human right to water. Another observation is simply that the formal declaration of a human right to water does not guarantee that it will be satisfied. And again, Dr. Torrijado said this as well. We have declared a formal human right to water, but we have not met that right yet. Much more work remains to be done. But I would also note that that declaration and the legal statements and strong economies, those are all very important tools for meeting the human right to water, and we should not underestimate that as well. Here in the United States, as some have observed, we have failed to meet the human right to water. The example of Flint, Michigan, a poor, disadvantaged community near the city of Detroit, where bad management, bad monitoring by water agencies, bad Chemical analyses have led many years ago to contamination of water, primarily with lead, but with other contaminants. Was a wake-up call for many of us in the richer countries about that failure to meet human right to water. But I would note that even many years later, we have still failed to meet safe water and sanitation for the population of Flint, Michigan. And it's inexcusable in many ways. But this is not just an urban problem. The Pacific Institute, my institute in California, has done work for many years on the failure to meet basic water and sanitation rights for disadvantaged communities in the agricultural regions of the Central Valley of California, where too many communities are still drinking water contaminated with nitrates, with pesticides, with chemicals from agricultural runoff. Again, this is a problem we've known about for decades, but have still failed to address adequately. So this is a problem in the richer countries as well. Of course, the pandemic has also raised concerns about access to safe water and sanitation and the importance of safe water and sanitation in the context of a global pandemic. The impacts of the pandemic are worsened by the failure to satisfy basic human needs for water. And again, the worst impacts, fall on poor and disadvantaged communities. We know early on from our health agencies that hand washing is a critical issue. It's a critical way that we can help reduce the adverse health consequences of the pandemic. But what if you don't have access to safe water? What if you don't have access to the sanitation systems that can help address some of the consequences of the pandemic? And I and some colleagues wrote about this many months ago at the beginning of the pandemic to try to raise awareness of the critical role of safe water and sanitation for meeting health needs in the context of the pandemic. Nelson Mandela said in the year 2000 that it is one thing to find fault with an existing system, it is another thing altogether, a more difficult task, to replace it with another approach that is better. And in this context, Nelson Mandela was talking about water. This was a context talking about the failures of our current water management systems and the difficult task of improving water management in the context of improving access to safe water and sanitation. So let me close with a few key observations about actions that need to be taken. The world has made great progress in addressing the content and the concept of the human right to water, and we still need to do more in that area. But we also need to move from the human right to water to the responsibilities and actions to meet that human right. We need to address poverty as a key driver of the failure to meet basic needs for water. And the encyclical statement that came out of the Vatican from the Pope was an important call to action about the issue of poverty. A lot of attention was paid to the encyclical in the context of the severe issue of climate change. But I would note that there were many important statements in the encyclical that also addressed poverty and the context of the human right to water. We need to expand investments of time, money, and expertise in addressing water problems. We know that we don't lack enough money to address this issue. We know we don't lack technology. We know we don't lack expertise. What we lack is a commitment of time, money, and expertise to address water issues. In the context of the pandemic, one of the things we've learned is when there's a global crisis, there can be plenty of money. In the United States, we have passed literally trillions of dollars of what we call economic stimulus money to help businesses, to help communities, to help unemployed populations in the context of the pandemic. But we have failed to explicitly address water issues when we're adding money to the economy. And we could use stimulus money in a much better way to address some of these fundamental challenges of poverty, the fundamental challenges of water, the fundamental challenges of access to energy. But we have not done that. And one of the things that I like to talk about in this context is that as we're thinking about rebuilding our economies from the pandemic, as we're thinking about new kinds of economies, as we're thinking about new kinds of businesses, as we're thinking about new kinds of social institutions, let's build back not the old institutions, but let's build back better. And I think that's a critical point. Finally, I'd like to note that the Pacific Institute, my organization, for the last several months has been launching several critical science and policy projects in the context of water and the pandemic. And we're trying to address a wide range of water, health, and equity issues. We're looking at the issue of water utility disconnections. Around the world, many utilities disconnect communities that fail to pay their water bills. There are other parts of the world that have banned disconnections that ensure an access at least to a minimum amount of safe water in the context of the pandemic, even when there is not an ability to pay for water. So let's address water utility disconnections, but let's also understand that utilities have to have revenue in order to continue to improve the access to safe water, to upgrade their services. And Dr. Biswas addressed some of these issues in the context of Phnom Penh and the other communities that have success stories at both providing safe water, but also continuing to provide reliable, consistent utility services. Let's look at new financing tools, green bonds, for example, new innovative international finance tools that can permit us to invest more in providing the capital needed for rebuilding or building or maintaining our water systems. Let's think about changes in water demand with the pandemic. We've seen in the United States increases in water demand from people staying at home, but decreases in water demand from commercial and industrial systems. And that has implications for the way we manage water and the way we build back our systems in the future. Let's think about building safety. Buildings that have been closed for months in the United States, there's a risk of stagnant water and there's a health risk there. And the Pacific Institute has just put out a fact sheet for how to reopen our economies and reopen our buildings safely to ensure that health is not compromised as economies begin to reopen. And we're also trying to address the important role of the private sector in helping our governments and our communities reopen safely from the pandemic. So thank you. I'm going to stop there. I appreciate the opportunity to offer some thoughts, and I look forward to the additional comments of my panelists and from the questions of my other colleagues. Thank you very much. And I think I can.
Thank you very much, Dr. Glay. I hope I have not interrupted you. I think I have not interrupted you. Have already finished your presentation. Thank you very much. So now we'll continue with Rafael Ramirez. Rafael, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. Can you hear me properly? Yes. Thank you for having me here. I'm here in Oxford, in the United Kingdom, where it is raining, which is very common. Yeah, we are here in Oxford in the basin of the Thames River. I have had the opportunity to work with the local water company and with other companies that have had an ongoing work. The methodology that we use and develop in Oxford scenarios planning will be available in Spanish with the name of the strategic planning. This is a methodology in which the dialogue that we have nowadays in 2020 will be addressed not as it is addressed today, but how will we address as from 2030 or 2040? If we could see the dialogue that we are having right now, how that dialogue was useful, how it will be useful in the future. There are certain major advantages where certain current assumptions are more easily questioned, is seen as from the future and not from the past. And there are activities that we have done with NGOs, the IMF, with local groups in different sectors in all the continents. The difficulties involved in the right to water, in my point of view, not as an expert like as it is or Cecilia and some other speakers in this group, this has to do with the water issue that I have addressed in my track record. It's very odd if we see it from the future and now. I have some old data. In a quote-unquote developed countries such as England, United States or France, 30% of the water produced does not reach the beneficiaries. That if we have 3 cars and only 2 get to the car agency. Why do we have so many losses of water? There are so many leaks. I remember when I interviewed a French executive man from a company that was doing well but wanted to privatize water in Mexico. The Mexican city had 2 infrastructures to serve its inhabitants in Mexico, plus the infrastructure it would also need. Only to recover these losses of this structure that was not adequately maintained, perhaps we should say the poor are forced to steal water. So in order to achieve that this right, this need to drinking water can reach out to everyone, there should be another way to produce and distribute water than the one we have at present. One of the figures that I kept thinking about is that the water that is produced by some state companies, 100% of the water is drinking water, but that less than 2% is used for long watering, and water is squandered, is misused. There are a large number of people who don't have access to water and sanitation. So from the economic and technical point of view, the system is highly inefficient. This inefficiency creates inequalities. So as Alejandro Rossi explained before, and Cecilia Tortajada. In the United States, in addition to the squandering of water, there is a great use of energy. This rises from the amount of energy that is used. 13% of water, it's for the government. This 13% of energy produces 53 million cars yearly. According to the data I have used to prepare this presentation, Argentina has 14 million cars. So we spend more than 3 times of all the cars in Argentina compared to our water in the United States. In some cities, 60% of the energy budget. There is no other way to give or supply water and to, according to the infrastructure we have nowadays and we have had since some years in the past, we wanted to use water. Water dates back to the Roman times. In London, there are drainages that are in operation. The intention that we need to create, as Peter said before, to create a different infrastructure from the one we have today to serve water consumers is a reality. The issue is, where do we find the major dialogue? What are the interests that we have to raise so that vital innovation takes place? In the same breath, at the same time, we have these issues that Alejandro mentioned before. There is a lack of water, and there are places where there are investments. And there will be more in the places surrounded by water. So I'm very happy that I have been invited to participate in this seminar. If we see the dialogue that you are promoting from the point of view of our grandchildren, or even before our children, we should, or they should ask them if we are talking about this issue, and if we should invite or we should call upon other interests to be discussed in this roundtable. An alumni has tried to develop the diversity, the values of diversity of the Amazon basin. And it will be very interesting for you to join a basin to basin conversation. I was at a company that had a very controversial history in Canada, for example. All the participants were disinvesting in factories located in water heat stress basins, because they didn't want the chocolate factory to be fighting for water because they are in the same basin. So if we have a basin to basin policy and the sky is based on the clouds, a basin to basin conversation. In the Amazon basin, we have 9 countries, 100 comrades, thousands of cities, and millions of inhabitants. How can we create a dialogue for 2 or 3 generations, or 5 generations? That, I think, would be the next step, so as to have a conversation that will result in the consequence that Peter Clegg mentioned before. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rafael Ramirez. Now we give the floor to Lucio Ruiz. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be taking part in an event like this. Worse than this crisis is a pity not to draw from this opportunity the great test of humankind, among them the pandemic. Pope Francis says that either we succeed or we fail, but we are not going to be the same. Uh, in the present challenges and the future scenarios, we open the series of online fora. If the forum goes from the right to water to the right to hope, the vector appears as from the right to hope to the right to water, and so the conceptual and operational circuit is closed, involving the intrinsic relationship between water and hope. In the 5th anniversary of the encyclical Laudato Si, that requires a rethinking of all the human system, we should interpret why the right to water becomes a right to hope. So if we rethink the key factors, principles in the encyclical, yes, clean and drinking water poses a paramount issue because it is vital for human life and to sustain water and land ecosystems. This is the first one. The next. The access to safe drinking water is a basic, paramount, universal human right because it determines people's survival, and therefore it's a requirement to exercise the additional human rights. Let us now watch a video. Let me see if I can play it. Let us look the reality since Pope Francis to rethink these principles. He has been participating during the pandemic. I'm sorry that I could not play the sound in this video. This event that we have seen, which is called Orbit Space, was special. It's like an icon of the overwhelmed and isolated humankind. You know, this pandemic time, we can highlight some key factors. The first one, 3 keys for diagnosis purposes. The first one, we are all in the same boat. We are weak, we are lost, but we are all important and necessary equally. The second one, the storm unmasks our vulnerability and shows our trivial certainties. The makeup has fallen down. The makeup of stereotypes has fallen down. The third one, borders collapse and all integral speeches fade away in the light of an imperceptible presence of our weakness. A third group, 3 keys to understand the situation. First of all, we move forward feeling that we are strong and capable of doing anything. But it's more part of humankind has moved forward, whereas most of it has been left behind. The second one, we keep on moving ahead. We want to stay healthy in an ill world. We have failed while taking care of the planet Earth and our brothers and sisters. The third one, we have tried to solve the seriousness of the situation only with some secondary activities while waiting for everything to come back to normality. And the third group of keys, 3 keys that question the existence. The first one, are we going to keep on looking outwards in light of the hunger of so many, knowing that there is food for everyone and the wars nourished by wishes of desires, domain, and power? Second, will we change our lifestyles that get so many people involved in poverty for an austere human life with an equitable distribution of resources? Third key, will we adopt as an international community the necessary steps to curb the devastation of the environment, or will we deny the evidence that we have? Another group of keys, key factors to create the future. First of all, to decrease the international penalties, to forgive the debt of poor countries, to curb the drug trafficking or to seize the drug trafficking to save lives, to create and save lives. Second, to understand that technocrat paradigms do not suffice only for this crisis or for the major humankind problems. The third key factor for the future, we should think about an integral development project with a diversity of peoples, the access to land, the roof, and work. Three keys or 3 key factors to start afresh. The first one, to love our common house and to take care of it and of the weakest members. Together, we'll be able to defeat the global challenges. Second, an ecological conversion with specific actions. We need a shared plan to defeat the threats against our common house. The third one, each one of us can make a small contribution. We should not think that these efforts are not going to change the world. Conclusion, it is important to rethink everything because what has happened is more than a healthcare crisis problem, it's an anthropological problem. Restarting will not mean restarting life from the moment we left it. There has been a profound change in our history. So it's high time, as Pope Francis said, it's high time for us to choose between what truly matters and what happens, to discriminate from what is necessary from what is not. It is time to wake up and activate the solidarity and hope that is capable of providing a sound argument, support, and meaning. It is time to house hope and to make hope be the one that strengthens and consolidate all the pathways. This is not a time for us to be selfish. It's time for us to express solidarity and to turn to innovating solutions. That's why it's important to think and act, because questions and problems are not going to be addressed by simply reopening the different activities. It is time to come up with solutions, because it is against the suffering where we measure the true development of peoples. Who more than you, the host of this water forum and participants, who more than you, that from the intellectual to operational arena, from the religious, human, and political settings, can create bridges, call upon people, intelligence, resources for creativity. So this is not just a utopia or a dream, but that we can carry out operational initiatives. Thinking about a new world implies that today we have the possibility to create something new. It is our responsibility. It falls upon us to be the protagonists of the new humankind. The hope should boost our creativity and our capacity to come up with an answer. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lucio. And now we are going to work in this way due to time issues. Now we're going to give the floor to Shani Batimo. Some of the questions that you raised have already been answered. Thank you, Dr. Peter Glay, who has been taking some of these questions. Some of these questions were for Rafael Ramirez. Thank you, Rafael. Now we'll give the floor, and thank you, Lucio, and Peter, and Rafael for this panel. Now we'll give the floor to Gianni Batimo, who is an outstanding participant. He is in Turin. And now we'll leave all questions for the last panel. Gianni, the floor is yours. Please, Gianni, turn on your microphone. Thank you. The microphone is on the left of your screen. We cannot listen to you, Luis. At the bottom. Yes, let's try once again. Let's try once again. If not, we continue with it. If not, we can ask Lucio to say that to him in Italian. Shani, you can see that option on the left, on the bottom part of the screen. There is a microphone and it's next to the camera. So, Luis, do you think we can continue with the panel and then the IT people can work on this issue so that Shani can speak next? So we'll work with Shani and the IT staff, and we'll continue with him after the next panel. The third panel is made up by Patricia Walinga. Then we'll hear from Daniel Grudi, and the last speaker will be Ricardo Lorenzetti. Patricia, the floor is yours. Patricia, please turn on your microphone. Thank you. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with all of you here. It's a pleasure to see Cardinal Humes, Luis Lieberman, and everybody who was in the Synod, and Gabriela. Thank you for having me here. The water issue, the issue of the right to water and the right to hope is an issue that concerns us all, above all to native Indian populations that are in the Amazon basin. We all know the Amazon is one of the major water sources in the planet. And our primary concern has been that this most important fresh water source is being devastated by industries that don't see the beginnings of the rivers or the mouths of the rivers, where there are the eyes of the water, where all the rivers converge. There has been respect, and this has been our ongoing fight. Even if we are talking about peoples that have made us be aside of governmental decisions, these are peoples that have said that we are the poorest of the poorest, and we are the last link of poverty. And even if we are native Indian populations, we do not have access to drinking water. When I was a child, we carried water from the river to home, and we carried water in tanks, in little tanks. Now, with modernity, we have been provided with a pipe, but it's not drinking water. So we always have problem with parasites, because sometimes we move water from the running river, but the tubes are not cleaned. These are basic tubes. In these pandemic times, where everybody has seen that hand washing is important, we have to take care, and it seemed that everybody working in the water system were infected with COVID. And so the city feared that we could lack water because of the disease. There hasn't been, for example, there hasn't been soap. So at least basic things that we have had are water as something basic in communities, but we don't have access to soap in these pandemic times. We have heard that the great goal is that all communities have drinking water, but it's not the case. This is people that is talking about the infringing of native Indian people's rights. There is no drinking water, but at least we have water in pipes. In some other communities, there isn't even water. We are lucky to live in the jungle, where there are falls, small rivers, where the situation is different from Ceiba Baja, where there are more ponds. In those areas, we should compulsorily be supplied with safe water. That is to say, all these people that live in these in the Amazon communities. I'm not aware of other realities, but I know the situation of the Andean Paramos, because there all the river basins are born. Even if we say that we live in the Amazon area, that we are Andean people, we have realized the importance of all these ecosystems, of our forests that are vital for our existence. In this context, now we are fighting against a pandemic that has visibilized the marginalization of native Indian populations. We knew that this problem existed, but now it's more serious because everything is centralized in the major cities. And people have forgotten that we exist as native Indian populations. Even if oil has been drilled from many areas, marginalization exists. Marginalization has been exercised by us, and there has been more impact because in all these apocalyptic times, because all converge to us, dengue, coronavirus, floods, and the breakage of oil pipes that have contaminated the river basin. The right to water there is vital because communities have bathed these contaminated waters, and now they are all affected by this problem. The lack of balance and the climate crisis of such a magnitude. We have had 5 floods. In the basin where I come from, there have been 5 severe floods. It has been devastated. And all this lack of balance makes us see that the situation is not easy for native Indian populations. We are there trying to fight, to resist, and always reporting, as we have always done, and fighting with our traditional doctors because we cannot expect assistance from the state. This pandemic has been useful to view the magnitude of neglect towards us. And if we get to surmount this hurdle, it is vital to see the mistake that have been made. The right to water is important. We have protected it. The forests are there for it to flow, but the lack of balance is also affecting us all. And we have to be aware that in cities, there is no drinking water. Many communities don't even have pipe water, and they have to go to the rivers to drink water from contaminated rivers in sites where the industries are affected, and they get their resources from, for example, in countries such as Ecuador, and the corruption of governments have affected us all. This is what I can share from our territory, based on what we are living, both in the climate crisis and and how we are affected by the viruses, and the feeling of impotence we have because we cannot act as we should, because the situation is out of control, and we see how we lose elderly people due to this deadly pandemic. Thank you, Liz, for having me here, and thank you, everyone. Thank you, Patricia. It has been a pleasure to listen to you. Now we give the floor to Danielle Grudy. Danielle, the floor is yours. Good morning, everyone. I know that I am the last one, and as we all know, in this COVID time, we are sick and tired of being Zoom connected for such a long time. So I would like to reflect upon education in the Zoom-based context. We're living in a Zoom-based context. How can we think about the work of education and the training of people regarding their answers to water and the environment? In the Chinese language, the word crisis is a combination of 2 words. One of them is danger, and the other is opportunity. And while we reflect upon the right to water and this crisis, health crisis, how can this critical and dangerous moment be also an opportunity to rethink our work in education? I work at a university that has 30,000 people, and we have had to close our doors, and we have had to search for new teaching methods, and in the same breath we have to run risk of educating people, knowing that there are many risks involved. But we have learned a lot, and we have crossed the river, as it is said in English, in the sense that we are not going to go back to what we had before. But in the same time, there are many times to convey information. But there are things that we can only do personally and in community, and that we cannot technically do. So how can we think about the conveying of information, but about the training of people that is oriented to the transformation of people in society? In other words, how can we find the true being of people and the living water? In that regard, I would like to highlight in this transformation process, I would like to highlight 5 elements of 5 aspects of leadership and education. Not only regarding the outdoor but indoor development. In Laudato Si, Pope Francis says that the deserts are on the rise because the deserts are also increasing in size. In that sense, how can we pay attention to what people want? What are the true questions people have nowadays? The idea is how to search for leaders that can help us find this being. There is a severe drought in terms of the worldwide leaders. The contents are empty. People are starving of thirst or dying of thirst. The World Economic Forum said or mentioned the qualities of the leaders that trigger transformation, and they say that the leaders nowadays have 5 dimensions. They have mind, heart, nervousness, muscles, and they also have a soul. And I would just like to make a remark regarding the 5 dimensions. First, I want to talk about mind. That is to say, we can think about these aspects, and they need to be well informed, and that we can understand the reality and science. But beyond the mind, with Zoom, we have learned from students that they need more than information. They need a connection. That's why the second element is to have a heart, because it's the Latin world or the Latin culture more rapidly understands that at the bottom, the search for truth comes from the heart. Not only should we feel our mind, but we should touch our heart. These images that Lucio showed about Pope Francis in the square of Rome, they get to the bottom of our beings. So it's, the heart is not only the center of emotion, but it's also the true center of knowledge. Augustine said that we cannot know something fully if we don't love it. So in that sense, we need people that can get in touch with their being. The third is the nerve. The nerve. We have the capacity to run risks. We have decided to reopen our classes in August. And there are some people who are saying that many risks are involved. And it is true. We are not certain whether this is the right decision to make. But we cannot anticipate a life without risk. We have to assume risks that are part of our life. And in turn, we should have a broader view rather than only avoid risk. So leaders that are nervous and don't want to run risk and think well are the most efficient. The muscles are also a major leadership dimension, but it's not only a coercion muscle. How can we have institutions that can use the forces and create communities that are not militarily strong, but they have the capacity to love and to transform? And last but not least, the soul dimension. And how can we find and invite students and tell them that there is a river beyond the ecological rivers? It's a living water river. It's a river where the ecological crisis is also linked to spiritual crisis. Pope Francis has stated that we have to find a spiritual renewal. So we can say that tomorrow we will be celebrating this Jesus Sacred Heart party. In the Sacred Bible, they said that there is the risk of living water. This time of crisis, ecological health and water is also an opportunity for us to spiritually renew ourselves and to see what means more in life. So I want to make my contributions so that we can keep moving forward. Not only to search for information and training, but also community transformation. Community and personal transformation. Thank you, Daniel Grudi. Now we give the floor to Ricardo Lorenzetti. The floor is yours. Well, good morning from Argentina. Good morning to everyone. I want to thank you for having me here. It's a great honor for me to share these reflections with great thinkers and people who are involved in specific actions for a better world. I would like to share with you some ideas we're working on, not only in the judicial branch, but also in other areas where I participate, in the environment, and in the Legal Global Environmental Institute. These are issues that concern us all. First and foremost, I want to reflect upon the theoretical framework or paradigm with which we are examining the pandemic. The current model is a defensive reply-based model against a new phenomenon, and the environmental-based world puts forward an environmental view of this phenomenon, what we regard as a One Health approach. There is only one health, the health of nature, and human health are intrinsically connected. So in light of a new phenomenon, such as the coronavirus, the first humankind reaction has been based on hypothetical reaction. There is very little information, and the reaction is obviously based on the most immediate needs. It's a model based on human health in the cycle. And from the point of view of emotions, it is based on fear of the unknown. The thing is whether this is sustainable. The environmental view is a systemic kind of view. What we should all ask ourselves, what happens if next year there is another zoonosis or an environmental collapse? are we going to have 13,000 million people in quarantine? It's a basic answer in the technological world. Quarantine is something that was used in the medieval times. Are we going to paralyze place economic activity? Are the states going to be willing to make investments that break away with the fiscal deficit? Perhaps nobody is thinking beyond this moment, but we should think about that. So the first reflection I want to make is that we have only one health. We can move from a defensive to a proactive model, and there is where hope lies. What we suggest in these works that we are doing is that we have to work positively on increasing nature resilience. That is to say, those areas that strengthen the natural responses. Because most of zoonosis that has occurred over the last years, in particular coronavirus, are the outcome of many causes that have to do with the natural deterioration. One of them is the wild markets, wild animals, deforestation, or the extinction of a species. So the outlet or the approach of pandemic is not only defensive but proactive. And the idea is to strengthen the natural system so we can strengthen human health. The idea of a one health is quite positive in terms of collective emotions work, because fear as a collective emotion is very dangerous. So the hope that we can strengthen nature, we can build a new economy amidst a cultural change is a great humankind bet. Secondly, I think that in terms of water, we are a lot of a resource that has become scarce. The great 21st century novelty is that nature is a limited resource. It's a phenomenon that is unprecedented and has not been seen in the previous century. Every time there is a scarcity resource, conflicts arise. And these conflicts are the ones that we can see in many countries. In light of water, we can see a rise in demand and a decrease of supply. This is very difficult to solve. In legal terms, we are working hard on these issues, and we have had several judgments in several countries, not only in Argentina, but also in Brazil, in Pakistan, in several African and Asian countries. There are many judgments, legal judgments linked to the water issue. What we suggest is basically to decline the demand or to make a more efficient use, which is an issue that was addressed before in this panel. The more efficient use of water is important because today water is increasingly being squandered. And increasing the supply implies working in the glaciers. The Supreme Court of Justice in Argentina has passed a major judgment regarding the constitutional nature of a law that protects glaciers, and we have included this issue, the idea that we have to protect the water supply. We have also made other decisions based on the water supply and the efficient and efficient use of water. I think that the legal branches can work hard on these issues. I think that it is important to focus on implementing these initiatives, because there are many rights, such as the human right to drinking water, but there are very few enforcement levels. If we talked about future, if someone in 200 years' time did, as it happened with the Amorite Code, discover a rock or a stone and read the laws written in the code and describe how people live 200 or 1,000 1,000 years ago, this would lead to mistakes because our laws and constitutions describe many rights, but the distance regarding the enforcement of the law is huge. That's why it's very important for social actors, social and institutional actors to participate. And within institutions, we mentioned the legal branches. There is another issue that has been mentioned before in terms of water. And most environmental disputes, the magnitude of the dispute does not match the political and jurisdictional divisions. Therefore, we talked about basins. One of the major water problems is that a river goes through different jurisdictions or political or legal jurisdictions. So when we raise this issue, this is a dispute between local mayors, governors, countries. That is, one delegates a problem to another one, such as it happens in the Amazon region. And in legal terms, competitiveness problems arise. So the great mistake is to want to adjust conflicts to jurisdictions or to political divisions, and not the other way around. We have made progress in legal decisions regarding this issue, and we said that when there is a water problem, the jurisdiction is the basin and not the political or judicial divisions available. So it is necessary to create a jurisdiction adjusted to the basin that can provide a global analysis. I think this is a great change that we need to make in our world. We have to discuss how institutions in their political and judicial divisions no longer tune in to problems, but they hinder the decision. We are not talking about the physical space, but also the temporary nature or expediency of the decision, because it's hard to make decisions when there is a water problem that goes beyond a political jurisdiction. So we have to come to terms, and that is very difficult. So we have to think about a major transformation in institutions in the sense of tuning them in to the problem we have. Create water agencies to deal with basin problems, and not the other way around. Another relevant issue I would like to mention, and that we have addressed, is the ownership of water. Because there is a major discussion going on in the sense that if there is a land division, ownership of land, there might also be ownership of water. And if the property rights on water, so water is going to be better used, more efficiently used, or better distributed or produced in terms of human consumption. There is an economic analysis sustaining this thesis. The problem is the following. If we think about that in historic terms, the former generation used water at no cost at all. Now we pay for water, and the upcoming generations are going to pay much more for the use of water. Therefore, if there are property rights, there will be a lot of people excluded from the market and therefore from the access to water. So it's vital to legally or judicially grade water in the cases in which a human right to drinking water is involved. We have argued, and this including this Argentine Civil Code and many judgments, that is a common good. The private sector can participate with financial instruments, but not as a property right. Because if it has property rights, it's going to leave many people excluded. And some other remarks I want to make to stick to my time slot. The service of water as a subject. If we observe how water has been regulated since the time of the Roman law, we can see that in the public right, water has been regulated to favor human life, as it is happening right now in pandemic times. And in the private law, in the civil codes, water was regulated to distribute property rights. That is to say, water has never been the protected legal good. The legal protected good is health. What has been happening over the last year is that as water is a scarce resource, it creates its own regulations as a protected legal good. Today, we have legislation on seas, lakes, rivers, drinking water. It is the water that creates discussion and legislation. It's vital to understand that has never occurred before. We have moved from an anthropocentric view, viewed water in view of the human use, to a geocentric or systemic kind of view, if you want, in more scientific terms. Because water is part of a system in which the human being is important, but it's a system that allows human beings to be met. Therefore, we have even written this down in several sections and legal judgments. We have to develop a different kind of view, a more geocentric culture, or based on nature interests as a system. The great problem is that today we can view the pandemic as a systemic remedial system. When the nature loses a balance, it remedies some of the things. If we put pressure on a city by building and hindering the water flows, in the first stage, nothing happens, conflicts add up, but in the long term, there will be a systemic correction. The city will be flooded. The natural response is to say, well, the city has flooded due to a natural disaster, but we don't see the minor decisions that add up conflicts and make the system to make a correction, to a homeostasis kind of correction. So the key issue from the environmental point of view is, let us think more systemically. The water issue has to be conceived based on how the water system flows works, both the water cycle and the water basin and the use of water, both in terms of supply and demand. And this, in the pandemic time, implies trying to overcome a defensive kind of look, which is also based on fear, to a more hopeful kind of look and say this is an opportunity to transform the system by strengthening nature and its defenses. I think we are working on these issues, and that's why the United Nations is developing a schedule which is called One Health Approach. That is to say, human nature and human health are intrinsically connected. Thank you very much. Luis, your microphone Well, thank you very much, Ricardo, for your presentation, which is the end of this first forum of presentations about the right to water, right to hope. Now, I would like to give the floor to Gianni Battimo. And we are going to be closing this forum. There are many questions that are going to remain unanswered, above all for Patricia and Ricardo, that have to do with local issues. But I would like to give the floor to Shani so that we can close this event. On July the 2nd, we'll be having the second forum. Gianni Battema, your microphone is on. You have the floor. Before some outstanding participants talked about these issues, I'm not an expert in terms of water, but I have learned a lot listening to you. I have learned that the water issue is not only a problem involving quantity but quality. And what I have heard above all this afternoon is that this is a problem. We're not talking about only about water. We're talking about clean drinking water that involves not only underdeveloped or developed countries, but also rich countries. We have these kind of problems in Italy as well. And this implies the participation of public sectors. They are willing to participate. Another thing that caught my attention in these speeches is that the water issue is the revolution problem, basically. In the water issue, almost all social problems converge. When we talk about the water problem in the Amazon basin, is only an organizational problem, or is it a public investment problem for defense purposes? And this means the same. For the fight we had in Italy, we have had a referendum so that water is a public good and not a tradable good. Yes. All this has to do with our public goods, with our capitalist kind of structure of society. Some years ago, in a discussion held in Buenos Aires, it was asserted that the only one that create an international community was the Pope, because no one trusts anyone more than someone who is a local power. They told me, well, we were against some. There was a head that was a head of other countries, and now the only one that can preach and promote the transformation of the social world today is, of course, the Pope. he has the charisma and the qualities and perhaps the willingness to do so. But we say that it's a power, a religious and not absolutely political power. And the other side of this issue is that when we create an international water forum like the one held today, it seems to me that we are going through a revolution. When we address the issue of water, access to clean water, for this equitable distribution of water to all peoples, and above all, the problem in land countries, even in rich countries, the right of clean water to everyone. This is the so-called global transformation. Obviously, there are ways to evolve in the water issue, even with partial measures. For instance, we have heard today in the last Lorenzetti's intervention, which was very clear. There are legal, judicial problems. The thing is, without a global initiative to advocate the right to water, to the right to clean water to everyone, it's hard to solve or imagine the evolution of this issue. For example, in Italy, we have a lot of clean water dispersion. And there is an enormous amount of mineral waters. That is to say, there is a trend towards selling or commercializing natural resources. We ought to respect the rights of inhabitants of the different regions. If this is seen at a European level, there is a group of companies that buy right to bottle natural waters and they sell them as mineral water, as clean water. I also think that I remember a rich friend that had a tributary river, and he got clean water to take it home, and of course he paid for its cost. All this is paramount because the water issue is related to the world capitalist order. There is much to discuss about this issue. There are different approaches to private property, and there is a trend to commercialize common goods. In Italy, we have a movement that is not the communist movement. It is addressed by powerful communists, and they pay attention to common goods, such as water. We think that in a city like Turin, the level of dead people is much higher in the central part of the city than in the rich peripheral areas. All this has to do with structures. I mean, they are important. It's important to discuss the water issue and try to participate. We should try to request different attitudes from the public branches. I'm not disregarding the small initiatives. The more, thank you. Thank you very much, Shani. I'm sorry for the interruption. No, I'm so, no, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Now give the floor to Ricardo Lorenzetti, and we will be closing this event. I will remind you that on July the 2nd, we'll continue with our second forum. Well, first and foremost, I would like to say that I'm a great admirer of Batimo's professor, and I think he has clearly raised the issue, the problem of major changes. This issue can lead us towards disappointment because there are many global issues and there are no institutional global issues. And the path to hope, if we think about these changes, they can come from society or stems of society or different players. The current situation is the following. I can tell you what we are addressing in the judicial branches. There is a big decline, and that's why we don't talk about progressive aspect of environmental or human rights. There is a non-regression, a principle of non-regression, stand still, is to say, take care of what we have and not go behind. There is a very serious situation at the worldwide level. This happens because the political institutions based on electoral regimes promise benefits and not costs. So the problem is how we do to get current costs for future benefits that nobody has clearly identified. Plus, why the non-orthodox players have a value. They are not within the electoral system. That's why today there are many actions. The legal branches are part of this. We want to achieve a legal branch transformation, so the legal powers are part of it. There are many countries, including Argentina, where have included the right to quality and polluted water. Mexico also has its Supreme Court of Justice and judgments. It's also the case in Pakistan. There is a movement going on, and I agree that this is very hard because there isn't a global institution and it's many different to address global issues with local institutions. So I think this is the way. We have to raise awareness, have dialogue, create processes according to the encyclical letter. Politics cannot be only dispute of powers, but create processes. And this is what we are doing. So I want to commend you all. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ricardo. And I have a different proposal. I want to suggest Alejandro, Peter, Rafael, Lucio, and Patricia say a phrase for us to keep on thinking the right to water and right to hope. So I will start by Patricia. Patricia, can you turn on your microphone? I will start with Lucio Ruiz with whom we talk on a daily basis. He doesn't have a prior script, but it seems so. Well, we were looking at each other. Okay, reflection can be the need to have a commitment from all of us to make a small contribution, all of us, in the management involving, for example, Russian RTs, and all the programs that the government has to implement. It's a commitment of all of us where we are taking into account what they were saying about health and the private good were protected. If water is not there, we are left with nothing. So commitment is the word. Thank you, Lucio. Now we give the floor to our brave Patricia, who incidentally among 130 people once Cardinal Umens and the Pope talked about, and they said, and the Pope said, when Patricia speaks, we stop talking. Thank you, Luis. I think that this is a life commitment depending on the Amazon and the Amazon ecosystems, including water, where the water sources for the Amazon above. It's a personal commitment, but I invite you all to take on a global commitment so the fight of the native Indian population is not in vain. Thank you very much, Patricia. This is in tune with what Dr. Lorenzetti stated before, how to create a global agenda for decisions, not only from the critical basis, but from the technical point of view. Peter Blake.
So thank you all to the organizers. I would simply say keep water in your hearts and in your work. Keep communicating the importance of water for all. And to everybody here, stay safe in these very uncertain times.
Thank you, Peter. Rafael Ramirez. It's a pleasure to meet you and to have listened to you. Thank you, Luis, for having me here. I agree with Patricia in the geographic area where we are responsible for managing the Amazon basin and others in Latin America. It's important for human life and for the planet. Perhaps in future, we can invite the next generations, children and youth, that is to say the future of our world. It's going to be a good reality. I think that the scientific activity where people are involved, such as Peter, people work in the glaciers, some other people work in oceans, in rivers. This community is creating a division in the planet. I think that if we talk about basins, we will more easily turn dialogue into action. And perhaps there is a basin that can more easily be used than the Amazon basin itself. Thank you for having me here. It has been a pleasure. I have learned a lot, and thank you for listening to me. No, thank you very much. Thank you for being here. And the good news is that once we meet, we start working together as Cardinal said 1 year ago. We hosted a seminar called The Right to Water, Right to Future, where Dr. Lorenzetti and Alejandro Arce participated, and the issue of hydric critical water races was mentioned, and it was related to technological aspects. This was a guiding principle. This is a challenge, and we are going to take it up in this forum. And we're going to include young people that are going to more playfully participate because they are more aware of this issue. Alejandro Rossi. Thank you, Luis and colleagues. For me, it has been a great experience to learn from everything has been said today in this forum, the panel of questions and reflections. It has been all very interesting. And of course, I agree with the basis approach. My final reflection is the following. In terms of human right to water and sanitation, hope is and cannot stop being an accelerated action based on principles. An accelerated action based on principles that are guided towards the most vulnerable people. If we don't succeed in having all that into only one action, hope will be emptied of contents and will turn into a mere promise. But hope is much more than a promise. And for the promise to be believable, it has to have a substance and it has to be fulfillable. And so this is the idea that I want to mention, and all dimensions that I have mentioned are vital. Thank you. Thank you very much, Alejandro. Well, and now this is the time to come to an end. Now it's time to have lunch, for others to go to sleep or to go back to work. I remind you that on July the 2nd, we'll be having a second seminar. It has the same registration system, and we'll be advertising this forum. I want to thank all the speakers for their time and generosity, and for the fraternal spirit that has been united in this online forum. Huge hug at a distance for all of us, and let's give a round of applause to everyone at a distance. And it's a pleasure to have shared this moment with you. Thank you very much, and have a very nice day.